welcome to the semi-finals of this ICU tournament. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. On the appearance here today, we have CUDS 1, which is represented by Taeyeong and MC and John. And on the negative, we have TU1, represented by Go and Stevensen and Noritaka. Very briefly introduce educators from the right. Now, Yo, Kachige, Kowa, Robin, and Kohei, and sorry, let me be the chair. And on the motion that we have is that this House believes that the figureheads of national liberation movement, such as Aung Sang Suu Kyi or Dalai Lama, should not become politicians after their movement succeeds. So first, I'd like to invite the Honorable Prime Minister to open this debate. Here.
Mr. Speaker, during the time of oppression in the Philippines, Corazona Aquino's son is now president right now. She was a leader during the oppression. She did all of her efforts to liberate the people in the Philippines. But what we believe on the government side is that their purpose ends there. We firmly believe that there was a lot of advantageous situations and political situations, especially during the characteristics of newly emerging democracies, and we on government side are proud to say that their limit is existent. What we're going to do in today's debate is that let's set up our model and how we're going to set up today's debate. I'm going to first talk to you and answer the question about why today's status quo contradicts the purpose of these leaders and why that's fundamentally problematic. I'm also going to talk to you and answer the question about why it harms the democracy in these newly emerging democracies. And last of all, I'm also going to talk to you about why this particular leader is going to be harmful for the political discourse and the healthy ideas of this particular situation. Let's set up our model, right? We believe that these leaders are allowed to exist in their societies. They're allowed to be symbols of their society in situations such as the king and queen of places like Thailand, places such as the United Kingdom, or whatnot. They are allowed to encourage people to vote. They are allowed to encourage people for political participation. Here is where we draw the line. They cannot actively endorse in one particular political party or a political entity existed within those newly emerging democracies. We fundamentally believe that the line is where they do not be part of politics, and we believe that that line is extremely clear. Obviously, they can exist within those societies. We're not oppressive regimes. Let's go into my first argument about why it contradicts the purpose of these leaders. Because we have to understand the situations of what happened in necessarily the past. The leaders' main purpose, when they wanted to liberate that country or they want to liberate that community and gather and unite the people. During the process and during the ideas of doing that particular process, they gained a lot of respect. They gained a lot of mental support from the people who wanted to be liberated from that oppressive society. They even gained a lot of instances in financial backup or of material support to allow that leader to fundamentally liberate that country. So the conclusion that we can draw here is that these people were here to liberate that country from that oppression, Mr. Speaker. They weren't necessarily there to create and be that political leader. They weren't necessarily there to be that new president in that society. Even opposition might contend that these people or these liberators have created sacrifices for that liberation, Mr. Speaker. But we believe that those sacrifices are only existent when the people were able to believe in that particular leader, believe in trying to liberate that country from that oppressive regime, Mr. Speaker. And we believe that that's the context. Their purpose was not necessarily to be that new political leader, Mr. Speaker. So this gradually moves on into my second argumentation about why it harms democracy. No thank you, sir. Because before we understand why it harms democracy, we need to understand the characteristics of these newly emerging democracies, because we believe that that's the context of today's debate. The fundamental problem in these newly emerging democracies is that they are less likely to have infrastructure for that democracy. Obviously, there's going to be less possibility for things such as media, things for information for people to make an educated decision. There's going to be less possibility for people to advertise themselves. Why is this problematic, Mr. Speaker? The conclusion that we can draw here is that people are it's extremely hard to oppose that particular leader, Mr. Speaker, for four main reasons. The first reason is because fundamentally we believe that this person is the liberator. This person was the hope of all of the people existed in that society, and therefore it is extremely hard for a contention or like another political candidate to oppose that particular leader. Second main reason is because people recognize that leader and give more recognition towards that leader compared to other political candidates, right? Because to some extent we believe that equal participation, equal amount of representation is needed, but compared to other political candidates, other political political oppositions, we believe that this leader has far more recognition, far more amount of exposure in that particular status quo because there's less media, because there's less advertisements. The third main reason is because fundamentally because people really believe in all of the ideas of that leader. It is extremely hard to criticize that leader because everyone sees that as a political leader, Mr. Speaker, as their hope of their own country. Therefore, the conclusion that we can draw from this line of analysis is that it is extremely hard to produce healthy debates because democracy is all about engaging and endorsing within the ideas of individuals. But if it is hard to criticize or go against a particular leader, and we believe that this healthy debate is going to be non-existent within that society. But the fourth main reason why this is problematic is mainly because it leads to a lot of situations where it can create a political dynasty within that individual country. It encourages family rule, it encourages the family of that leader to also take part in politics and be the supreme leader in that necessary country. We see the examples of the Philippines and where Corazon Aquino's son is the president right now. We see instances in India where Gandhi's family members are also being part of the politics. Even the prime minister's son is a politician, Mr. Speaker. We believe that all of those instances are situations where we do not want to see, and we obviously believe that this is very problematic. Before I go on, yes sir.
Okay, if majority of the citizens wish he or she will be elected, what is wrong with that? Why you have to ensure the perfect voters' autonomy?
It's not necessarily upon whether people are stupid or not, but it's the amount of expression. It's the amount of fair democracy and equal amount of representation that exists within that society. If some political candidates want to be the president, then we also believe that to some extent these people need to be ensured that amount of representation, Mr. Speaker. We don't necessarily think that people are stupid, but we have to encourage understand the idea that these newly emerging democracies have less media, have less advertisement, and that's the characteristics. Let's go on to my last part of my substantive, which is about why it is harmful for political discourse. Because fundamentally, we believe there's going to be less healthy politics. Because fundamentally, we believe that other candidates, it's almost impossible for them to win. And there are two main reasons what happens after that mentality. The first main idea is that these people won't run against that political candidate, against that particular leader. Mainly upon the idea that even if I run in that political race, even if I go against that leader, I am not going to win. And that mentality is already embedded upon these people because these people have already experienced that liberation. But second of all, the other situation or the other case scenario is that these people are going to join the political party of that leader, Mr. Speaker. We believe that this is extremely problematic for several reasons. The first main reason why this is problematic for you to join a political leader or a political party that the leader is existent is that if you have a different idea that contradicts against that leader, then obviously this is not necessarily going to bring a lot of discourse and a lot of situations. But second of all, we also believe that to some extent these people could get kicked out of that political party. So fundamentally, if there's no contrasting ideas, if there are no contrasting ideas within that political party, obviously discourse and information is not going to be exchanged within these political parties. But second of all, what I've just explained is about the presidents, about how people won't be willing to go for presidency. But we also believe upon the idea that there's going to be less incentive for people to join politics as a whole. There's going to be less situations for politicians, mainly because you can't necessarily join a political situation, and therefore, because fundamentally, if there's less infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, then there's higher possibility for people to choose political parties based upon the amount of exposure, based upon the political party, Mr. Speaker. The very idea that the leader is existent in that particular party means that these people have a less incentive to enjoy and less incentive to actually be part of politicians, and that is why we are supremely proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Now I'd like to move on to negative cases. Negative cases, I'd like to invite Noritaka Kon.
So the thing we want to protect from side opposition is quite simple. We want to protect the discourse, including those figureheads, regarding the necessity of those figureheads, and regarding the situation that after those, even after those social, like liberal movement was succeeded, their situation at the political arena is still unpredictable. We have to actually at least make a chance for also those figureheads to participate in those public and political discourse. That is why we back to those. I have three things to talk about in the speech. First of all, I'm going to talk about the issue of the right to become politician. Why, like past incidents or ideology that person has cannot be the criteria to reject the political privilege that, the person right to become candidate. Second of all, I'm talk about, the necessity of like giving chance for those figureheads to become politicians even. Number three, I'm going to talk about the worst scenario which might happen by taking this policy. But before moving on to the point, several responses to the previous speaker. Two responses. First of all, he told you status quo situation is very contradicted with the purpose of political leader who are of those figureheads. But we must think so in the status quo. Because when Kona has already pointed out, even under our paradigm, we still have, still under our paradigm, still have a chance to actually reject that person to become politician in the first place. Because we're not automatically letting those persons to become political leader of the country in the first place. And even if but due to that person became political leaders, and there's less chance for media to be exposed. Well, we see that is not problem because that was a decision made by the citizen, which was purely meets the purpose of liberal movement, which they wanted to achieve in the past. That is when we see no problem. Second of all, he told you like the status quo political discourse, including those figureheads, might be very unhealthy, but we don't think so also wiser. Because there's always an international eye who actually check those situations, what happened after liberal movement, what's happened. For example, Human Rights Watch is actually constantly visiting Myanmar in order to check whether Suu Kyi was actually was very consistent with his past claim or so and so forth, whether Suu Kyi didn't shift her stance radically to the extent that will harm people or so and so forth. That is why if they, the situation that, person who became political leader will suddenly oppress people or lessen the media to be exposed, lessen the chance for media to expose, is so unrealistic if you see the reality. So moving on to the first point about the right to become politicians. So we support our case from two levels. First of all, we say past incidents that person has cannot be the criteria to reject the political privilege to become candidate. Why is that? Because there's no absolute there's no absolute idea or absolute criteria to actually say that person past influence or that person's power in society can be the criteria to reject the political privilege of that person. Take a case of like celebrities. Even celebrity have very social influence in society. For example, in the United States, Schwarzenegger could become politician because those past influence was not actually related to the political issue in the first place. But secondly, about the criteria of the ideological aspect. Whatever the ideology he has cannot be the reason to also reject the person to become candidate in the first place. That is why we speak. Even if in the stats we see a lot of party based on far-right people or extremely conservative people or so on and so forth, no one can subjectively decide what that idea will make discourse healthy or unhealthy in the first place. At least we have to make a chance for all the people to participate in the political arena, also for the figures as well. Yes.
Why do you think teenagers or prisoners can't have their right to be part of politics?
So of course, we wait that person to become 20, or like the age that he can be actually go to election. In the first we see that conversion is not realistic thing. So moving on to the second issue about the necessity of the figureheads to participate in the political election. Two levels. Firstly, as I've already told you, the situation we see after those liberal movements was even become successful. The situation is very unexpected. No one can expect or no one can predict what leader is most suitable for the new coming democracy at that time. That is when we can actually subjectively reject that person who might harm the new democracy at the country or so and so forth. But secondly, more important, we have to actually characterize those figureheads more. Three levels. First thing is those kind of figureheads tend to be a symbol at the country in the first place. For example, in Suu Kyi was a very psychological support the citizen who lived in Myanmar that in order to pursue the democracy at Myanmar. That is why in some cases we have so some people might going to be suffer if those persons were going to be excluded from political arena because they will lose some psychological support they had in the past. But second of all, Mr. Speaker, those kind of figures have tendency to know the majority's interest more than other politicians. Because for example, Suu Kyi did know that military oppressive regime was very harmful for the citizen on the ground compared to other person who cannot recognize the problem in the first place. That is why those persons are more effective. But last, Mr. Speaker, those figureheads was a person who directly experienced the past oppressive regimes, bad, wrong conduct, or so on and so forth. Suu Kyi was actually imprisoned directly by the political leaders. So that's why she can directly tell the fear or the danger of the possibility that those kind of the oppressive regime potentially have. That is why, Mr. Speaker, at least, by bringing those people at the political sphere, we can actually make discussion whether that oppressive regime's policy was bad or good in the first place. We can at least protect the discourse regarding those, which can uniquely come from those figureheads. So that's moving on to the issue of the worst scenario case happened by taking this policy. So we see a lot of cases if other person who was not figureheads of liberal movements became replaced the leader at the country. For example, if you see the case at Egypt, when Morsi was not in the past supported the majority, suddenly replaced the seat of the president. He suddenly tried to pass the unconstitutional law and disregarding the majority's interest. The reason why those situations might happen is because we cannot expect what is the most suitable idea at the time of new democracy. That's why we see a strong necessity to have those persons as uniquely to participate in the political discourse, such as what I would back propose.
Thank you very much, Leader of Opposition. Now I'd like to move on to the second by Taeyeong and Say.
Mr. Speaker, I really don't understand why they talk about the UN watchdog came to my countries. Maybe that is not a good president. That is why we can change. I don't think UN watchdog is doing that, right? UN watchdog, watching countries when they have a problems with constitution and human rights, that thingy, rather than they choose the good presidents or not. That is why that checks and balances idea is completely irrelevant in today's space, right? They don't say Lee Myung-bak was good, bad president. We know Lee Myung-bak is a bad president, but they never say to Korea, you shouldn't change, you should change your president, right? It's completely irrelevant in today's space. With that, I have two questions. First, is right to be a politician absolute, right? Second, so like those symbols of the liberation movement can making a compromise choices, which is going to bring the betterment of my society and country. First idea is right to be a politician absolute. The Taeyeong gave them a POI, the underages and the prisoners thing. Why they cannot be politicians? They said, no, it's not relevant. It is irrelevant because we said it is not absolute right to be a democratic country, right? Then they say everybody have a right to be politicians. We think a lot of people should have a right to be politicians, participate to the politicians, because that brings the better democracy to the countries, right? But our argumentation coming from Taeyeong was why your policy deters the participation of other candidates, right? There wasn't any response. I'm going there later. Plus, we said the purpose of the being a figurehead who get a lot of advantages by the people, right? Mental support, maybe material support, maybe respect. Our purpose is to bring the democratic country, bring the democratic system and country, bring the democratic system in my countries, right? We said your policy harms the democratic movement in my countries. That is why they don't have a right. Then let's look at the cases why their policy deters the participations. First, we said figureheads is the liberator, and we see them as the liberation themselves, right? That is why I can't say maybe Aung San Suu Kyi is a bad woman. Then I'm going to be called as betrayer, right? She is my hero. That is why you shouldn't criticize them. But there is no political fight and political competitions when it comes to elections, right? Second, in the newly democratic society, they have a really low levels of infrastructure, like the media, like the paper thing, like the people gathering in the one places, right? That is why these figureheads, who is well known by the public, is going to get a lot of advantages over these people. That is why most likely this woman or man is going to be elected, right? Now why this is a problem at the first place? That I don't think being a leader and being a president and being a prime minister, politician, is totally different ideas, right? If you want to have a liberation movement, people, you can have a charisma and you can persuade people, this is a bad guy, this is why I kill you. I think this is enough. But being a politician and president, you need to choose the best choices of that countries, right? I don't think that liberation movement is the one who can do that. But maybe it's true. They can be a best person. But the problem is, like you said, Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? We need to ensure all the people's participation in the politics, and we let the citizens choose the best people among that healthy competitions, rather than I'm a hero, that is why you need to vote for me. Like the case of Philippines, Jen explained to me, that is why it's the truth idea. Her former president was the husband, like wife of the liberation movement husband, the people, right? She wasn't that great when she controlled the Philippines. But her son has become a president, even if her countries went wrong. Which shows it's really, really hard to criticize and compete with that woman, that political figure. That is why your policy doesn't bring better democracy into today's space. Then they talked about, no, the symbol is the good people because there's several reasons why. First, she said symbol knows more because Aung San Suu Kyi was in prison, that is why she knows other reasons. I think if she was in the prisons, I don't think she knows that much, right? Maybe other people knows more. Maybe interact more, maybe study more, maybe politically liberate and open idea people can know more. Second problem, they said symbol knows more majority interest. I don't think this is true. There's a lot of people who knows interest of the citizens, even if I wasn't the symbol of the country. Maybe I am the leader of the labor union. Maybe I was part of the fighting protest of the people, right? Maybe I know more than you. That is why your policy cannot stand. Then they talked about, look at the case of Egypt. I don't know why Egypt case comes from, right? There wasn't any liberation people become a president. I think there was, dictators was kicked out by the peoples, and some different people coming and be a politician. So I don't think that thing why it comes from here. But at least in our policy, we ensure better competition among the people, right? At least in our policy, we enlarge the choice of the individuals, right? That is why my thing is better than you. Anybody?
Okay, please explain why you have to ensure the 100% equal participation. Because even in the status quo, there is a disparity. For example, amount of money which can be used for the political campaign.
Yes, firstly, money is limited. That is why everybody can pay them. Yes, it's limited in USA. You need to read newspaper. I think all the ideas of democratic movement is ensure the participation of the people, right? Maybe you are living in the dictator countries, but my experience in Japan is not. That's why you're coming from different countries. So my last idea, symbols cannot make certain decisions, right? When you become a symbol of a country, if your country liberate from the oppressed regimes, sometimes you need to have a compromise choices. Like Koreans do. We compromise with Japan, we get compensation money, we said, I'm not going to ask your responsibility, right? These things is particularly important because Korea get the money, they're making a big corporation named the POSCO, which brings the betterment of the Korea. Your policy, this political figure cannot make this compromise the choices. Why? Because if you compromise the oppressed regimes, that ideas directly undermine your stance, your basic stance. I'm not going to compromise with the countries or people who oppress us because I liberate you. Maybe politician is difficult too, but the biggest difference is politicians' basic stance is I'm going to bring the betterment of the country rather than liberate movement, right? That is why I can persuade my citizens, right? Even if it looks like compromise and bad right now, in the long term it will bring the betterment of the countries, right? So those decisions which is critical, Let's like imagine the case if Dalai Lama compromise with China to get more money, then people is going to be pissed off. That's why Dalai Lama is not going to do these compromisations, right? But I think that is really essential if you need it. That thing only can be happens people who is not the figurehead. That is why I can bring the betterment of the countries. We can ensure participation of the people rather than you. For those reasons, I'm very proud to propose this.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to move on to the deputy report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Seeing as the Deputy Prime Minister's speech consists of solely refutations and reiteration of what the Prime Minister has said, I don't think it is that hard to refute their points, right? I'd like to start my speech with 4 refutations. The first refutation being the contention coming from the Prime Minister that they say that the figurehead's role ends at the end of the movement. When the movement succeeds, so does the role of the figurehead. Okay, suppose that we accept this. Suppose that we accept that the role of a figurehead as a figurehead ends there after the movement succeeds. It still doesn't end their role as a human. It still doesn't end the right to participate in politics as a human. Especially because we are talking about nascent democracies, newly emergent democracies, where every single human being should be allowed the right to vote, the right to participate in the politics. We don't believe that precluding certain person just because he has a background of being a figurehead is a justifiable thing, is an intuitive thing to do in a democracy, Mr. Speaker. Because they are still a human, despite the fact that their role as a figurehead has ended, they might want to continue their visions as a politician. First refutation means that the principle of democracy stands on our side. Second refutation, which is going to address their problem about now, the right of being a politician is not absolute. That is their claim. Okay, true. We might concede that not everybody can become a politician. It might be a little exclusive, right? However, we'd like to challenge this. We'd like to question them. We'd like to say that the burden of the government whip in the next speech is to prove why Aung San Suu Kyi is a teenager, why she does not have the qualifications to become a politician. Because all they did is say that teenagers cannot become politicians, so can't Aung San Suu Kyi, which doesn't make any sense at all, ladies and gentlemen. Because what they have proved is only that some people may not participate in the politician, but it doesn't mean that Aung San Suu Kyi does not have the qualifications nor the ability to become a politician, or especially the importance of becoming a politician. No, thank you. Now, the third thing, they talk about the third refutation is being that how this particular leader is going to be make the vote so biased towards them that it basically is like a landslide and so on, right? Mr. Speaker, one thing that we need to, they need to prove is that first of all, they need to prove why it is so bad, definitely so bad, if that one person, even if that one person garners most of the votes, Mr. Speaker. Because this person, having been the charismatic leader that leads the country from oppression to the success of the movement, means that he or she is somehow qualified enough to lead the country. And we have seen that there are states where the founding fathers, there are a lot of states where a founding father has become the leader of the nation, they're becoming a politician. We see, say, even the United States, for example, the founding fathers become the first few presidents, for example. Did anything go wrong with them? We do not think so. Now next, they talk about how the recognition and coverage means that it is not fair and so on. Okay, I'd like to refute this briefly and move on to my constructive, right? Mr. Speaker, they say that, because people recognize them as a hero, people recognize them, therefore, it's going to make it unfair and so on. I want to question, do you recognize the legitimacy of political campaign? Do you understand that in democracies we're talking about, political campaigns is a legitimate way to increase your influence, increase your reputation in order to convince people to vote for you? Remember that, ladies and gentlemen, these leaders, liberation figureheads, do not have their reputation built in one day or one night. It was through years of struggle against oppression towards the nascent democracy that they have finally liberated the country. It is the end of that caused them to have this recognition by themselves, which in itself is a leverage for them, and we believe that this leverage is legitimate in itself because it is what we are doing in politics. This is what we are doing in democracies. In all elections, some people are leveraged, some people are not because because of previous recognition, because of political campaigns, we believe that this is the same case, and therefore there's no principal justification to deny like Aung San Suu Kyi or Dalai Lama of their rights to be a politician. Before I go on to my constructive, yes please.
Do you think newly emerging democracies has the adequate environment or situation for good infrastructure and campaigns for democracy?
No, I agree with you on this regard, that nascent democracies probably do not have enough media coverage to do that. But that is exactly why my next constructive actually stands. Mr. Speaker, the first thing, we believe that you need to crawl before you walk. Just because you have created a newly emergent democracy doesn't mean that the democracy is mature, doesn't mean that the democracy is ready to do this all sides of political campaign that the United States or other mature democracies can do. We need to understand that exactly because of the characterization, where there is a lack of media and so on, we cannot be sure who we are voting for. We cannot be sure that if this political figurehead, this national liberation figurehead, steps down from their role and then leaves it to a bunch of other politicians whom people have no idea of and have no idea of knowing more of, we believe that it is not going to create a good, a conducive situation for democracy, ladies and gentlemen. Because we believe that if we want to promote discourse, as the leader of opposition has told you, the discourse being very important, even if it is a little biased, even if there's more information on one side or the other, we still believe that the discourse itself is very important, right? But, ladies and gentlemen, we need to understand one thing. If there is other political candidates, there are a lot of potential political candidates, then at that point there is already a potential for a political discourse. Because that means that some people are ready to question or to challenge whether or not the hero of the country, liberation, is necessarily going to be a good politician or a good leader. Because there are some opposing people. It also means that the window for political discourse is open wide. And that is where we should start from, ladies and gentlemen. When we have certain information available to us from his or her contribution during the oppression, through the end of the movement, and and when we have several other people, it creates the opportunity of discussion, right? But ladies and gentlemen, my second constructive here, why is the lack of leading figure when we have this liberation figureheads unable to participate in politics, where it's going to be bad? This is going to be an extended analysis from what the leader of opposition has told you about Egypt, right? Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that the lack of leading figure, in fact, inspirational leading figure or an aspirational people, means that there's a less chance of unifying the people, especially when we talk about those liberation figureheads having endeavored to actually create this sort of unity or create this sort of liberty among the people. We believe that if it is not the character that they can recognize, that they can trust, with their heart, if it's not a character that they're familiar with, it is going to cause a lot of complication, especially considering that in nascent democracies, there are still factions that probably struggle for the power in the top. There are still probably a few groups of people who might as well try to turn tables to their benefit, which is exactly what is happening in Egypt or other nascent democracies, where they start trying to struggle for power, and where there's a fraction of power, they are fighting on the top to the top, and it is going to cause several more segregation. And the most important thing is that those other leaders, potential leaders, might not share the ideologies, the ideals of the liberation leader who started out fighting for the liberty, who started out fighting for the sake of democracy. Rather, they might be authoritarians and stuff that we are not sure of. To ensure that democracy is actually guaranteed, we need to ensure that these liberation figureheads actually have the choice to become the politicians, and therefore I believe that the opposition has taken it.